The accomplished CEO pulled his baseball cap down low over his eyes and stepped quietly into his own retail outlet, blending seamlessly into the bustling crowd of shoppers and staff, ensuring that no one would recognize Jamal Washington, the black man who had built Washington Retail Group from the ground up through years of relentless hustle and overcoming obstacles that many could never imagine, starting from humble beginnings in underserved neighborhoods where opportunities were as scarce as hope, turning a single corner store into a thriving chain that spanned the city and employed hundreds. But lately, the reports from this particular location had seemed almost too impeccable, with employee satisfaction scores hitting the ceiling and absolutely no grievances or complaints making their way up the corporate ladder, prompting Jamal to decide it was time to go undercover and witness the operations firsthand, drawing on his own experiences of navigating a world that often judged him by his skin color before his skills, knowing exactly how to adopt a low-profile demeanor that would allow him to observe without drawing attention, but nothing could have prepared him for the faint, heart-wrenching sounds of quiet despair echoing from the staff restroom at the back of the store, a place meant for brief respites but now serving as a hidden chamber of sorrow. Through the narrow gap beneath the door, a small silver name tag lay discarded on the damp, tiled floor. Catching the harsh fluorescent light, reading Elena Ramirez, janitorial team, and the noises emanating from within weren't just ordinary tears but the raw, guttural expressions of someone whose entire world was crumbling under invisible pressures, stirring something deep within Jamal, a chill that ran through his veins as memories flooded back of his own early days scraping by with multiple low-wage jobs, facing subtle and overt biases that made every promotion feel like a battle won against the odds, and now, realizing that just a few months prior, the corporate dashboards had glowed with praise for this store's performance, touting it as a beacon of efficiency and harmony with perfect metrics across the board, yet this single moment painted a starkly contrasting picture that demanded investigation. Standing there frozen in the unforgiving glow of the overhead lights, Jamal couldn't shake the terrifying question burning in his mind. If such distress was unfolding right here in his own company, directly under his leadership without him even suspecting it, what other blind spots and oversights had he allowed to persist in his pursuit of growth and success, potentially at the expense of the very people who made his empire possible? The revelations that lay ahead would profoundly challenge his long-held beliefs about effective guidance, unwavering commitment to his team, and the genuine cost of turning a blind eye to subtle warning signs, transforming what had started as a routine undercover check into the most pivotal turning point of his entire professional journey, forcing him to confront not just managerial failures, but the deeper systemic issues that echoed the discriminations he had fought against throughout his life. With a steadying breath, Jamal tapped lightly on the restroom door, his voice gentle yet firm as he asked, "Are you okay in there?" And the sounds inside halted abruptly, replaced by subtle shifting and what sounded like hurried attempts to regain composure, followed by a shaky response, "I'm all right. Just need a second, please." But her tone betrayed the truth, laced with exhaustion and fragility that spoke volumes more than words ever could. When the door finally creaked open, Jamal found himself face to face with Elena, a woman in her late 30s of Hispanic heritage, clad in a creased and worn custodial uniform that bore the marks of endless labor, her eyes reddened and puffy from recent tears, and she quickly stooped down to retrieve her fallen name tag, though her hands trembled so noticeably that it took her a couple of tries to secure it, a small but telling sign of the stress weighing on her. "I'm so sorry," she murmured under her breath, her gaze fixed firmly on the floor to avoid any eye contact, as if ashamed of her vulnerability in a place where strength was demanded at all costs. "I really need to get back to my duties right away." But Jamal, drawing on his own history of masking pain to survive in unforgiving environments, took a moment to observe her more closely, noting how her palms were chapped and roughened from constant exposure to harsh cleaning chemicals without proper protection. How deep shadows of fatigue circled her eyes, the kind that came from juggling relentless shifts with scarcely any rest. and most alarmingly, how she stiffened instinctively at the sound of approaching footsteps from the main sales floor, a reflexive flinch that hinted at deeper fears ingrained from repeated negative experiences. "You don't seem fine at all," Jamal said softly, keeping his voice low and reassuring to build a bridge of trust. Introducing himself as, "I'm James, just starting my first day here," hoping the alias would allow him to probe without raising suspicions, and Elena glanced up briefly, her eyes assessing him with a mix of caution and quiet desperation, as if weighing whether this stranger could be an ally or yet another source of judgment, before her shoulders finally sagged under the weight of her burdens, and she admitted in a hushed tone, "It's just overwhelming right now. Everything piling up. My son Miguel has this asthma condition that's been getting worse lately, flaring up more frequently. And I'm struggling so much with the costs of his medications and doctor visits, it's like no matter how hard I work, it's never enough." She paused abruptly, shaking her head as if regretting the vulnerability of sharing such personal details with a newcomer, perhaps fearing it could be used against her in some way, and added quickly, "You really don't need to hear all this, it's not your problem," but Jamal, sensing the opportunity to delve deeper while maintaining his cover, gently pressed on with a question, "How long have you been working here exactly?" To which Elena replied, 4 years now, and I've been reliable every single day, always showing up on time, never calling out sick or missing a shift, putting in whatever is asked of me," and she nodded toward a nearby bulletin board plastered with work schedules, a chaotic mess of scribbled alterations and crossed-out entries that Jamal followed her gaze to, feeling a knot form in his stomach as he took in the disarray. Elena's name appeared sporadically across the board, her assigned shifts fluctuating wildly from week to week, 25 hours in one, jumping to 40-inch the next, only to plummet back down to a mere 18 without any rhyme or reason, creating an unpredictable pattern that made it impossible for anyone to plan their life, budget for essentials, or achieve any semblance of stability, a far cry from the consistent scheduling that Jamal knew his company's policies were supposed to guarantee for all full-time employees. "They keep cutting my hours like this," Elena whispered, her voice barely above a breath, as if afraid the walls themselves might report back. "Mr. Hayes claims it's all according to company policy, but I just don't understand it because the store is always so busy, constantly short-staffed with lines at the registers and shelves needing restocking, yet they reduce us anyway." And Jamal, clenching his jaw internally while keeping his expression neutral, recognized immediately that this wasn't policy at all, but what appeared to be deliberate disruption designed to keep workers off balance and dependent. Then, her voice breaking slightly with emotion, Elena continued, "And when I finally mustered the courage to ask about the health benefits that are supposed to kick in after the initial probation period of 90 days, he just dismissed me outright, saying I didn't qualify because my schedule has been too irregular, as if that's not something they control." The frustration evident in her tone as the pieces of a larger, more sinister puzzle began to form in Jamal's mind, igniting a slow-burning anger that he forced himself to contain for the sake of his undercover role. "That doesn't add up or seem correct at all," he replied carefully, choosing his words to encourage more disclosure without alarming her. And Elena, after glancing around nervously to ensure no one was eavesdropping, leaned in a bit closer and confided, "It's not just me. There are others facing the exact same issues Luis over in the stockroom, Carla in sales. We're all dealing with these unpredictable cuts and denials, but Mr. Hayes always warns that if we're unhappy or dare to complain, there are plenty of other people out there who would be more than happy to take our places without question," her words sending a shiver down Jamal's spine as he processed the implications of such threats, especially in a diverse workforce where many, like Elena, might feel particularly vulnerable due to their backgrounds or family obligations. Derek Hayes was the regional manager in question, a name Jamal recalled from the personnel rosters, someone whose performance reviews had consistently been positive, with no red flags or alerts ever making it to the higher-ups at corporate. at least none that had been documented or escalated properly, which now raised even more questions about how deep this rot might go and who else might be complicit in allowing it to fester. James, Elena continued in an even quieter whisper, her eyes darting to ensure privacy. This job is absolutely everything to me. I can't afford to lose it because my son Miguel is only 7 years old, and without the proper medical help for his condition, I don't know what we'd do. Her voice trailing off as she struggled to hold back fresh tears, unable to complete the thought without her emotions overwhelming her completely. Jamal watched closely as she pinned her name tag back onto her uniform with those still trembling fingers, that small silver rectangle symbolizing so much more than a job title. It represented her lifeline, the means to provide medical care for her child, to pay rent and put food on the table, to survive in a world that often seemed stacked against people like her, and it was clear that someone was exploiting that very desperation as a tool to maintain control and silence dissent. I really must go now, Elena said, glancing toward the main floor where customers milled about. My current shift ends at 10 p.m. tonight, but I'm scheduled to come back bright and early at 5 a.m. for stocking duties, and even though it's essentially a double shift with no real break in between, somehow the payroll system only registers it as 7 hours of compensable time, which means I'm working extra without fair pay, her words highlighting yet another layer of unfairness that Jamal noted mentally for later investigation. As she walked away, her steps careful and measured, Jamal couldn't help but observe the subtle limp in her gait, likely the result of years spent standing on unforgiving concrete floors without the proper supportive footwear or mats that company guidelines explicitly required to prevent such occupational injuries, another clear violation that had apparently been overlooked or ignored in this location, adding to the growing list of discrepancies between policy and practice. Standing alone in the hallway now, Jamal stared at that disorganized schedule board, each crossed-out shift and arbitrary hour reduction representing not just numbers on paper, but real human impacts, families forced to choose between groceries and utility bills, parents lying awake at night worrying about medical expenses, workers pushing their bodies to the limit just to hold onto a sliver of security, and it struck him profoundly that he had built Washington Retail Group on the foundational principle of fairness and opportunity, inspired by his own journey as a black entrepreneur who had faced discrimination in hiring and promotions, vowing to create a company where everyone, regardless of background, could thrive, yet somewhere along the way, in the chasm between executive boardrooms and the daily grind on the store floor, that principle was being systematically eroded, leaving him to question just how widespread this problem might be and who else among his employees was suffering in silence while he remained oblivious in his position of privilege and power. The next day dawned with Jamal returning to the store under his alias, determined to observe more closely, and he positioned himself discreetly to watch Elena clock in for her early morning shift, her movements deliberate and focused, despite the visible signs of lingering fatigue from the previous night's labors, her face set in a mask of determination that spoke to her resilience as a mother fighting for her child's future. It wasn't long before Derek Hayes emerged from his office at around 6:45 a.m. A man in his mid-40s with a polished appearance, slicked-back hair, and an air of self-assured authority that bordered on arrogance, the kind Jamal had encountered many times in his career from those who wielded power without empathy, and Derek's eyes immediately locked onto Elena as she mopped a section near the entrance, his voice slicing through the quiet morning air like a sharp command. "Ramirez, this area isn't up to standard yet. What exactly have you been doing with your time so far?" Even though the floor gleamed spotlessly under the lights, reflecting like a mirror. But Elena, accustomed to such unfounded criticisms, simply nodded submissively and replied, "I'll go over it again right away, sir," without arguing, though Jamal could see the tension in her jaw as she suppressed her frustration. Derek's response dripped with unnecessary disdain. "And try to focus on the actual work, instead of whatever distractions you have going on." A comment that felt pointed and personal, designed to belittle rather than correct. and then he summoned her abruptly to his office for what he called a private discussion, leaving Jamal to watch from a distance in the employee lounge, maintaining his cover while his mind raced with strategies to gather irrefutable evidence. As Elena entered the office, another employee, Luis from the stockroom, slipped into the lounge and sat down heavily beside Jamal, shaking his head in quiet solidarity. Poor Elena. This is the third time this week she's been pulled in there for one of those talks, he muttered, his voice laced with bitterness, born from shared experiences. What's he typically saying to her in these meetings? Jamal asked casually, feigning new hire curiosity while subtly probing for more details. And Luis glanced around nervously before leaning in. It's always the same script. He reminds us how fortunate we are to even have these jobs, especially people like us. You know, minorities, single parents, folks from certain backgrounds who can't just walk away and find something better easily. He knows exactly who to pressure because we have the most to lose. Luis's words carried a heavy weight, echoing the discriminatory undertones that Jamal had battled in his own ascent, making this investigation feel even more personal, as he realized how such tactics perpetuated cycles of inequality within his own company. Through the glass partition of the office, Jamal could see Elena standing rigidly, while Derek remained seated behind his desk. A classic power dynamic meant to intimidate and diminish, her posture shrinking slightly with each word he spoke. And then Derek did something that pushed Jamal's anger to a new level. He pulled out Elena's timesheet and began marking it up with a red pen right in front of her, slashing through recorded hours as if erasing her efforts. Though the words weren't audible from afar, Jamal could see Elena's face crumple in real-time distress, and Luis whispered confirmation. He's cutting her time again, probably claiming some unauthorized break or inefficiency, just like he did to Carla last week, docking her 3 hours for what he called excessive restroom usage, and she's dealing with serious family health issues that require more frequent breaks. Reaching discreetly for his phone, Jamal activated the voice recorder app, knowing that whatever was transpiring in that office could provide the concrete proof needed to dismantle this operation. And fortunately, through the thin walls, snippets of Derek's voice carried clearly enough. I've told you before, Ramirez, if you can't handle the workload without letting personal matters interfere, maybe this isn't the right fit for you. There are plenty of others who'd be grateful for your spot without all the drama, his tone laced with condescension that made Jamal's fists clench involuntarily. Elena's response was barely audible, a plea of, "Please, Mr. Hayes, I just need consistent hours for my son's sake." But Derek cut her off sharply. Your personal problems aren't my concern here. What concerns me is that you've been discussing scheduling with other employees. And that sounds an awful lot like stirring up unnecessary issues to me. The implication hanging heavy in the air like a threat. Jamal's thumb pressed record just in time to capture the escalating exchange, with Derek continuing, I wasn't making trouble. I was just asking questions. Elena defended weakly, but he pressed on. Just what? Trying to organize some kind of group complaint? Because that would be very unfortunate for your continued employment status at this location. The words a clear and direct warning designed to instill fear and ensure compliance. The conversation culminated with Derek announcing, Now, I'm cutting you back to 12 hours next week. Maybe that'll help you refocus on the job instead of creating drama. And Ramirez, if I hear even a whisper that you've been talking to anyone else about schedules or company policies, we'll have to seriously discuss whether you're a good fit for Washington Retail Group at all, stripping away her dignity piece by piece as she nodded silently in acceptance, her spirit visibly diminished. When Elena finally emerged from the office, her face pale but composed in a forced mask of resilience, she walked past the lounge without glancing in, holding her head high despite the emotional toll. But Jamal had seen and heard enough to know that the phone in his pocket now held a smoking gun. Derek's own words exposing the systematic intimidation and manipulation occurring under the banner of his company. As Derek returned to his routine, whistling casually as if he hadn't just upended someone's life for another week. Jamal felt a profound shift within himself, a crystallization of purpose that this wasn't merely about one employee like Elena anymore, but about every vulnerable worker who had been ground down by managers like Derek, who abused their authority with impunity, especially targeting those from marginalized backgrounds. And the time for passive observation had passed. It was now imperative to uncover the full depth of this corruption and bring about real change. Leaving the store that evening with his mind swirling in a storm of thoughts and plans, Jamal drove his unassuming rental car back to the modest motel where he was staying under his false identity, a far cry from the luxury he was accustomed to. And in the quiet of room 204, surrounded by printed corporate reports, employee files, and his laptop, he began meticulously organizing his next steps, replaying the recording on his phone where Derek's threats echoed like nails hammering into a coffin of professional misconduct, each word providing damning evidence. But Jamal knew this was merely the surface layer of a much larger iceberg. If Derek felt bold enough to voice such threats openly, what other illicit activities was he engaging in when he believed no one was watching? Pulling up the store's employment records on his secure laptop connection, what Jamal discovered next turned his stomach in disgust, revealing over the past several months a staggering 55% turnover rate among hourly staff, with most departures officially listed as voluntary resignations. But in an economic climate where jobs were precious, especially for diverse workers facing additional barriers, it was evident that people weren't leaving by choice but being driven out through relentless pressure and unfair treatment. Cross-referencing those departure dates with Derek's performance evaluations, ironically, showed his metrics as exemplary labor costs slashed by 20%, operational efficiency boosted, and zero formal complaints ever reaching HR, painting him on paper as the ideal manager. But Jamal, with his keen business acumen honed from years of navigating corporate landscapes as a black leader, began to piece together how Derek had cleverly gamed the system. By keeping employees in a constant state of desperation and fear, preventing them from accumulating enough consistent hours to qualify for full benefits, and ensuring that anyone who might dare to raise concerns was subtly pushed out before they could file anything official. An approach that was as elegant in its design as it was cruel in its execution, disproportionately affecting staff of color and those with family responsibilities, mirroring broader societal inequities that Jamal had dedicated his career to combating. Opening a fresh browser window, Jamal started crafting an even deeper cover story for himself. James Lawson, a laid-off warehouse worker from a similar background, desperate for any employment, no immediate family ties to complicate things, just someone profoundly grateful for any opportunity thrown his way, the perfect profile of an employee that a manager like Derek would view as easily exploitable without pushback. He practiced the persona in front of the motel mirror, adjusting his posture to convey humility, altering his speech patterns to include colloquialisms from his youth in those tough neighborhoods, even modifying his walk to appear more subdued and eager to please, drawing authentically from his own early experiences before his business success elevated him, knowing that blending in wasn't about acting but about remembering the realities he once lived. The following morning, Jamal returned to the store dressed in faded jeans and worn work boots that he had sourced from a thrift shop to enhance authenticity, approaching Derek's office with a carefully calibrated mix of desperation and enthusiasm that would appeal to the manager's ego, knocking politely and saying, "Excuse me, Mr. Hayes. I heard there might be some openings here, and I'm willing to take any shift, any hours you have available, whatever it takes." Derek looked up from his computer screen, his eyes immediately appraising this new potential hire like a predator sizing up prey. And Jamal could almost see the mental calculations whirring another worker down on their luck, easy to control, especially one who appeared to fit the demographic he targeted for the toughest roles. "Experience?" Derek asked curtly, and Jamal handed over a fabricated resume complete with verifiable references he had arranged through discreet contacts, replying, "Mostly warehouse and manual labor, but that work dried up recently. I need steady employment now. I'm not picky at all. Cleaning, stocking shelves, anything you need, I'll do it without complaint." Derek's smile was sharp and predatory as he scanned the document. "I like that kind of attitude. No fuss, just hard work. Tell you what, James, I can start you on janitorial duties for the night shift, base pay of $11 an hour. You'll be teaming up with Elena. But a word of advice, don't let her fill your head with any complaints or stories. She's got a tendency to dramatize things unnecessarily." The casual cruelty in Derek's dismissal of Elena made Jamal want to confront him right then, but he forced himself to nod eagerly instead. "That sounds perfect, sir. Thank you so much. When can I start?" To which Derek replied, "Tonight, from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. And James, remember, I reward those who show loyalty and understand how things really work around here, but those who cause any trouble, they don't last long." The underlying threat clear as day, and Jamal nodded, as if in full agreement, though his understanding was far different from what Derek intended, setting the stage for a deeper immersion into the night's shadows, where the true extent of the abuses would unfold. That evening, Jamal changed into his assigned work clothes in the store's bathroom, transforming fully into James Lawson, the plastic name tag pinned to his shirt feeling strangely foreign after years spent in tailored suits and high-stakes meetings. But it grounded him in the reality he needed to experience firsthand. When Elena arrived for the night shift, she looked mildly surprised to see him there. "You came back. That's more than most do after the first day," she said quietly. And Jamal replied, "Told you I need the job badly. Guess we're working together now," keeping his tone light to ease into the partnership. Elena studied his face for a moment, perhaps sensing something different about this new colleague but unable to pinpoint it exactly, before saying, "Stick close to me tonight. I'll show you the full routine step by step. And James, everything I mentioned yesterday about being careful around Mr. Hayes, double that caution for the night shifts. That's when things can get even tougher, with less oversight and more demands." As the store's main lights dimmed and the last customers filtered out, leaving behind an eerie quiet broken only by the hum of refrigeration units, Jamal felt the weight of anticipation for what he was about to discover in the coming hours. No longer just an observer but fully immersed in the grueling reality. Ready to live the problems he had only begun to uncover, determined to gather the evidence that would ultimately lead to justice and reform for Elena and all the others who had suffered in silence for far too long under a system that had failed them. With evidence steadily mounting from his initial observations and recordings, Jamal delved even deeper into the shadowy undercurrents of the store's night operations, where the retail facade stripped away to reveal a labyrinth of inequities that extended far beyond simple scheduling manipulations, including insidious layers of racial and cultural biases that resonated painfully with his own history as a black CEO who had clawed his way up from environments rife with systemic discrimination, environments where opportunities were doled out unevenly based on appearance and background rather than merit. And now, posing as James Lawson on these grueling overnight shifts, he navigated the dimly lit aisles with a heightened sense of purpose, learning the intricate, back-breaking routine of janitorial work alongside Elena, while his sharp eyes and ears picked up on subtleties that painted a fuller picture of Derek Hayes's reign of subtle tyranny. During the sparse breaks in the employee lounge, which was little more than a cramped room with flickering vending machines and worn-out chairs that offered no real comfort after hours of physical toil, conversations with fellow staff members began to uncover recurring patterns of favoritism and exclusion that went unspoken during daylight hours, when the presence of customers might force a veneer of professionalism, but at night, with the store transformed into an echo chamber of fluorescent hums and distant machinery whirs, truths emerged more freely. Like when Luis, the stockroom veteran with a quiet demeanor shaped by years of immigrant struggles, confided in Jamal over a shared cup of stale coffee, "It's not just the hours being cut randomly, it's how the shifts are assigned in the first place. Daytime roles with better visibility, and tips go to the preferred folks, while nights like this, the dirty work always lands on us." His words laced with a resigned bitterness that Jamal recognized all too well from his early career rejections, where resumes with his name were overlooked in favor of less qualified candidates who fit a certain profile. Probing gently to avoid suspicion, Jamal asked for examples, and Luis elaborated. Derek mentions things like fitting the store's image when promoting someone to customer-facing positions, code for avoiding accents or skin tones that don't match his idea of approachable, and if you push back, suddenly your performance reviews tank with notes about attitude problems that never existed before. Revelations that made Jamal's blood boil internally as they mirrored the very barriers he had dismantled in founding Washington Retail Group, vowing to create an inclusive space where diversity wasn't just a buzzword but a core strength, yet here it was being weaponized to divide and conquer the workforce. As the nights blurred into a rhythm of mopping endless floors, scrubbing fixtures with diluted supplies that barely cut through grime due to Derek's unexplained budget trims, despite corporate allocations that Jamal knew should provide ample resources, he documented a slew of unsafe practices that compounded the daily hazards, like faulty cleaning equipment with frayed cords that sparked dangerously near water spills, mandatory overtime without mandated breaks that led to exhaustion-induced accidents, and a complete disregard for ergonomic standards, such as providing anti-fatigue mats or adjustable tools, resulting in unreported injuries that employees like Elena endured in silence for fear of reprisal, fearing that any complaint could label them as troublemakers and lead to further hour reductions or outright termination. One particularly grueling shift, as Jamal hauled heavy trash bins through narrow back corridors, cluttered with unchecked inventory overflow, a fire hazard in itself that violated safety codes he had personally approved at the executive level, Derek made an unannounced patrol, his footsteps echoing ominously like a warden in a prison yard, and he zeroed in on Elena as she restocked supplies in a dimly lit storage area, his voice cutting through the silence with accusatory sharpness. "Ramirez, you're falling behind again. This isn't a social club. Maybe you're just not cut for this pace." The comment dripping with an undercurrent of cultural bias, implying laziness where there was only overwork, and Elena, wiping sweat from her brow, responded meekly, "I'm going as fast as I can, Mr. Hayes, with the limited tools we have." But he waved her off dismissively. "Excuses don't clean floors, and if you can't keep up without complaining, perhaps someone more appreciative would suit better." A veiled threat that Jamal captured on his hidden recorder, noting how such interactions were tailored to exploit vulnerabilities, especially for staff of color who often faced additional scrutiny. Building his dossier methodically, Jamal used quiet moments to engage other workers, like Carla, the sales associate navigating a hidden pregnancy amid fears of discrimination, who whispered during a late-night shelf reorganization, "He denied my request for lighter duties. Said, 'You're kind, always expects special treatment,' as if being a Latina mom means I'm asking for handouts instead of basic accommodations," her story unveiling a pattern of gendered and racial microaggressions woven into daily management, where performance evaluations were falsified with subjective notes like cultural fit issues or communication barriers to justify denying promotions or benefits to non-white employees, tactics that kept the diverse workforce fragmented and powerless, preventing any collective pushback. A critical turning point arrived during one endless shift when Jamal, feigning a need to retrieve supplies from an adjacent closet, positioned himself to overhear Derek's late-night phone calls from his office, the door slightly ajar allowing snippets to drift out. And what he captured on his device was a goldmine of incriminating admissions, with Derek's voice low but audible. "Yeah, the numbers look good this week." Ramirez down to minimal hours. Luis, at barely part-time, that Carla girl's on heavy lifting to encourage her to quit soon, followed by laughter as he boasted, "The key is targeting those who won't fight back hard immigrants pushing for citizenship, people of color who've dealt with worse elsewhere. Single parents like her with the sick kid. They stay quiet because they need the paycheck more than pride." The casual dehumanization striking Jamal like a punch, reminding him of boardrooms where his ideas were dismissed until a white colleague echoed them, fueling his resolve to expose this not just as mismanagement, but as a deliberate strategy rooted in prejudice. Derek continued detailing his schemes. "I'm rerouting those slashed hours to dummy accounts I control, pocketing the overtime differentials without a trace, and corporate sees costs dropping, thinks I'm a genius at efficiency," explaining how he billed phantom employees, perhaps relatives or fictitious IDs to siphon funds, a sophisticated fraud that Jamal cross-verified later with discreet access to system logs, confirming thousands diverted over months disproportionately from shifts worked by minority staff, creating a cycle where the most vulnerable subsidized the corruption. Expanding his investigation beyond this single store, Jamal used his motel downtime to remotely review aggregated data from other locations via a secure VPN, discovering similar red flags, elevated turnover in diverse demographics, glowing manager reviews, masking complaints that never surfaced, and patterns, suggesting a network of like-minded supervisors emulating Derek's playbook. Perhaps through informal sharing at regional meetings, turning what Jamal had assumed was isolated into a company-wide vulnerability that demanded sweeping reforms. Befriending the night crew more deeply, Jamal subtly encouraged the sharing of stories without revealing his intent, learning from a young black stalker named Trey how entry-level hires from certain neighborhoods were funneled into dead-end roles with promises of advancement that never materialized. They say prove yourself, but then nitpick every mistake, especially if you're not the right look for management, echoing Jamal's own entry into retail where he was overlooked for leadership until he started his own venture, inspiring him to note ideas for mentorship programs that could counteract such biases. A hazardous incident midway through the week brought the dangers into sharp focus. During a rushed cleaning of a spill caused by inadequate budget-cut absorbents, the floor remained slick, leading to Elena nearly slipping and injuring her back. But when she reported it mildly to Derek during his next rounds, he blamed her outright. "That's on you for not being careful, Ramirez. Consider this a warning next time. It could cost your shift." Docking her pay for negligence on the spot, an action Jamal documented with photos of the unsafe conditions, including expired safety gear and ignored maintenance logs, realizing that these weren't oversights, but calculated risks to cut costs at the expense of worker well-being, particularly those least likely to sue due to language barriers or immigration status fears. Intervening anonymously by leaving an unsigned note suggesting equipment upgrades in the suggestion box, a system Derek publicly touted but privately ignored, yielded no response, as expected, but it confirmed the manager's willful neglect, prompting Jamal to dig digitally deeper, accessing audit trails that showed tampered records where incidents were erased or downplayed, especially for employees of color, creating a false narrative of a safe, equitable workplace that fooled upper management, including himself until now. As the chapter of nights wore on, Jamal's undercover role tested his physical limits, endless lifting of overloaded pallets without assistance, breathing in fumes from subpar chemicals that burned his eyes, standing for hours on concrete that sent aches up his legs, but it also forged unbreakable bonds. Like when Elena, during a rare, quiet moment reorganizing the back room, opened up about her deferred dreams of opening a small craft business. Stalled by the instability here, and Jamal shared fabricated tales of his past struggles, drawing from real anecdotes of his youth hustling in similar jobs, building trust that allowed her to reveal more about the psychological toll. It's not just the body that hurts. It's the constant belittling, making you feel like you're lucky to be tolerated. words that spurred Jamal to reflect on his company's diversity initiatives, which he now saw as superficial checkboxes rather than robust protections, vowing internally to institute mandatory bias training and anonymous reporting channels that actually led to action. Derek's escalations grew bolder, assigning Jamal solo tasks, like moving entire shipments of heavy merchandise without lifts, smirking as he watched the strain, "Prove you belong here, or there's the door," reveling in the power dynamic that fed his ego. But Jamal captured video evidence of these assignments, including moments where safety protocols were blatantly violated, such as blocking emergency exits with excess stock to save time, risks that could lead to disasters but were overlooked for short-term gains. The chapter built inexorably to a boiling point during a mandatory all-night staff huddle Derek called to announce new punitive policies, like automatic pay deductions for any perceived inventory discrepancies, with veiled warnings aimed at the diverse team members. "Some of you need to step up or step out. We can't carry dead weight," his eyes lingering on Elena and Luis, setting the stage for Jamal's impending revelation as his evidence dossier swelled with recordings, photos, and data logs proving not just financial fraud but a toxic culture of discrimination that had no place in the company he built, transforming his undercover mission from mere fact-finding into a personal crusade for equity and justice that would redefine his leadership forever. The confrontation erupted in the midst of a tense, mandatory staff huddle crammed into the dimly lit back room just before the afternoon rush, where Derek Hayes, oblivious to the storm brewing, outlined his latest set of harsh, punitive policies designed to squeeze even more from his already strained team, announcing with a smug authority that any inventory discrepancies or minor errors would now result in automatic deductions from paychecks, a move blatantly against labor regulations but phrased as incentives for accuracy. With his eyes scanning the circle of weary faces and lingering pointedly on the diverse members like Elena, Luis, and Carla, adding veiled warnings laced with discriminatory undertones, "Some of you need to remember that opportunities like this don't come easy for everyone, so step up or step aside. We can't afford to carry anyone who's not fully committed." The words hanging heavy in the air like a noose, intended to isolate and intimidate those from marginalized backgrounds who he assumed wouldn't challenge him, but this time, Jamal, still disguised as James Lawson at the back of the group, felt the moment was ripe, his evidence compiled into an ironclad case that extended beyond individual abuses to expose a web of entrenched inequities, and he stepped forward calmly, his voice cutting through the murmurs as he activated the playback on his phone, letting Derek's own recorded admissions fill the room. Snippets of late-night calls, boasting about targeting people of color and immigrants for hour cuts, rerouting pay to fraudulent accounts, and reveling in the control over vulnerable lives like Elena's with her son's health on the line, the audio crystal clear and damning. The beauty is keeping them scared, especially the ones with kids or accents. They won't complain to corporate. Shock rippled through the assembled employees like an electric current, faces turning from resignation to wide-eyed realization as they stared at Derek, whose smug expression crumbled into pale, panicked denial, sputtering, "This is fabricated. You can't record without consent. Who the hell do you think you are?" But Jamal, maintaining his composure with the quiet strength forged from years of overcoming corporate glass ceilings as a black leader, simply raised the volume on another clip where Derek detailed the dummy accounts and biased shift assignments, the evidence mounting until the room fell into a stunned silence broken only by the phone's speaker, and as Derek's bluster faded into desperate accusations of illegality, Jamal reached into his pocket for his real identification, shedding the alias with a single, powerful declaration: "I'm Jamal Washington, the founder and CEO of Washington Retail Group, and as the black man who built this company from nothing despite every odd stacked against me, I will not tolerate this poison in my house. Derek, your time here is over. You're terminated effective immediately for fraud, discrimination, and abuse of power." The revelation landing like a thunderclap, gasps echoing as employees processed the sight of their actual boss standing among them in work clothes. his presence amplifying the gravity of the moment, symbolizing a bridge across the class and racial divides that had been exploited for too long. As Derek's face cycled through shock, rage, and defeat, stammering threats of lawsuits and rights, Jamal signaled to the security team he had prepositioned outside since dawn, two officers entering promptly to escort the former manager out, Derek making one last futile grab for control by pointing at the staff. "You can't believe them over me. They're just," but Jamal cut him off with icy precision. "I believe the evidence. Your own words. The logs showing biased evaluations, the stolen wages disproportionately from diverse workers, and the culture of fear you've fostered that echoes the very discriminations I fought to escape in building this empire." And as Derek was led away through the sales floor, past curious customers and the very aisles where he had doled out humiliations, Jamal turned to the remaining group, their expressions a mix of relief, disbelief, and tentative hope, addressing them with a profound apology that came from the depths of his own journey. "I owe each of you more than words can express, as someone who's faced prejudice in boardrooms and beyond. I thought I had created a company free of that, but I failed you by staying too detached, too focused on metrics that ignored the human stories behind them, allowing inequities to thrive unchecked. And for that, I'm truly sorry, but today marks the end of that era and the beginning of real equity." The silence that followed Derek's departure was thick with emotion. 15 employees standing in a loose semicircle, processing the whirlwind as Jamal locked eyes with each, acknowledging their individual struggles, from Elena's quiet strength as a Hispanic single mother to Luis's steadfast reliability amid immigration worries, to Carla's hidden resilience through her pregnancy, and Trey's youthful potential stifled by unspoken biases. And it was Elena who broke the quiet first, her voice trembling but clear. "You're really the owner, the one from the company newsletters?" To which Jamal nodded. "I am, and my path here wasn't easy. I started in places like this, facing doors closed because of my race, vowing to open them for others. But I see now that vow needs action, starting with making this right for all of you." Questions poured out then like a dam breaking, with Luis asking warily, "Does this mean changes, or are we still at risk for speaking up?" The fear of retaliation so ingrained that even liberation felt suspect. But Jamal reassured firmly, "No one is at risk, in fact. We're rebuilding with equity at the core," and he pulled out his phone to summon his trusted HR director, Vanessa Brooks, a fellow trailblazer he had mentored, who arrived within half an hour with a team of specialists armed with laptops and empathy, setting up an impromptu audit center in the break room to review every tainted file Derek had touched over the past year, prioritizing restorations that addressed not just financial losses, but the deeper wounds of discrimination. Elena Ramirez. Vanessa called first, her tablet glowing with data. Records show 4 years of service, but classified as irregular part-time with no benefits, yet your logged hours prove full-time consistency for 48 months. Her fingers dancing across the screen as she upgraded the status instantly. Effective now, full-time, permanent with comprehensive health coverage retroactive to your hire date, including family plans that cover conditions like asthma fully, and Elena's knees weakened, Jamal steadying her as tears of relief streamed down, whispering, "Miguel's treatments, they'll be covered?" To which Vanessa nodded warmly. "Pre-authorized today, no out-of-pocket beyond basics, and you're owed $16,239 in back wages, overtime, and equity adjustments for biased cuts. Check issued within 48 hours." The announcement eliciting a sound from Elena that blended sob, laugh, and gratitude, a cathartic release echoed around the room as others underwent similar reviews, with Luis receiving promotion eligibility unlocked after falsified attitude, notes were expunged, and Carla's maternity accommodations granted immediately with paid leave. But Jamal wasn't content with fixes alone. He announced sweeping transformations to embed equity company-wide, starting with mandatory unconscious bias training for all managers, developed in partnership with diversity experts to dismantle the subtle prejudices that had allowed Derek's tactics to flourish, and the creation of affinity groups for employees of color, parents, and other underrepresented voices to foster community and input without fear, drawing from his own experiences in mentorship programs that had been pivotal in his rise. Turning to Carla, he said, "Your strength through this is admirable, effective immediately. You're on protected paid leave until after your maternity, with full salary, benefits, and a secured role upon return, plus access to our new family support fund for childcare." Her hand instinctively going to her belly in disbelief, eyes shining with newfound security. For Trey, the young black stalker, Jamal offered, "I've seen your potential stifled. How about entering our accelerated leadership track, with scholarships for business courses and direct mentorship from me?" Trey's face lit up, the clipboard he held dropping in surprise. "But I don't have formal education." To which Jamal replied, "Neither did I at your age. What you have is real-world insight and heart. That's what builds leaders." The most symbolic shift came for Elena as Jamal faced her directly. "Your resilience has been the spark for all this I'm offering you. The store manager position, with full training in operations, diversity leadership, and strategy, starting at $70,000 plus bonuses tied to team equity metrics, not just sales." The room falling into absolute hush as Elena stammered, "Me? But I'm from the janitorial team. I don't know budgets or—" But Jamal interrupted gently, "You know people, you know fairness under fire. You know every corner of this store and the challenges faced by those like you. That's the foundation of true management, and will provide executive coaching tailored to uplift leaders from diverse paths, just as I wished I'd had earlier." Around the break room, transformations unfolded in real time. 15 people who had entered, expecting another day of subtle oppression, now witnessing their lives pivot toward empowerment, with Vanessa's team calculating collective restitutions exceeding $200,000 across the group. But the biggest innovation Jamal unveiled was the Equity Council, a worker-elected body with representatives from all demographics, granted veto power on policies affecting diversity and inclusion, and direct quarterly meetings with him, ensuring no future Derek could hide abuses. "This isn't top-down anymore. Your voices will shape our future. No retaliation, just collaboration." As questions turned to accountability, Trey asked pointedly, "What about Derek? Does he walk away scotangent-free?" And Jamal's expression hardened with resolve, "Absolutely not. His case is already with federal investigators for wage theft as a felony, plus civil suits for discrimination, and will recover every cent he siphoned, redistributing it as bonuses to those he targeted most." Vanessa adding from her laptop, "Patterns match at 5 other stores, similar biased managers, same fraudulent playbooks." Full probes launching today, with terminations and restitutions to follow, prioritizing equity audits to root out any lingering biases. The afternoon evolved into a collaborative session, employees sharing ideas for inclusive scheduling software that factored in cultural holidays and family needs, anti-bias hiring protocols, and community partnerships with local minority-owned businesses, ideas Jamal jotted down eagerly, realizing this grassroots input was the missing piece in his company's success formula. Months later, the store had metamorphosed into a beacon of inclusive excellence, with satisfaction scores soaring to 96%, turnover plummeting, and profits climbing 28% from a motivated, diverse team that felt truly valued. Elena now confidently leading in business attire, her office a hub of innovation where she implemented Trey's cross-training program to break down departmental silos, and Carla's post-maternity flex-time policy that retained top talent, while Miguel's health improved dramatically under covered care, allowing Elena to thrive without the constant shadow of worry. Jamal returned for unannounced equity checks, finding laughter in the revamped break room with cultural potlucks and affinity group posters, Trey excelling in his new role with mentorship sessions that Jamal personally facilitated, drawing parallels to his own path. Remember, barriers are just tests, turn them into stepping stones. Elena's transformation was profound. Her management style blending empathy with efficiency, leading to industry-leading customer loyalty, as shoppers noticed the genuine warmth from a team no longer fractured by fear. And together, she and Jamal co-designed the Equity Verified certification, a program assessing workplaces on diversity metrics, anti-bias practices, and worker well-being, verified through anonymous employee surveys and surprise audits, gaining traction as 12 competitors adopted it within the first quarter, sparking a ripple effect that recovered millions in owed wages sector-wide and inspired federal guidelines strengthening protections against discriminatory management. At a major industry conference, Jamal delivered a keynote titled Equity from the Edges, Leading with Inclusion in Retail, sharing anonymized stories from his undercover immersion. As a Black CEO, I thought success meant breaking ceilings for myself, but true leadership means shattering them for everyone. I discovered biases in my own backyard, targeting the very diversity that fuels innovation. And by listening to those on the front lines, we didn't just fix problems, we unlocked potential. Clicking through slides of before and after metrics, Elena featured as a case study of promoted talent, her presence in the audience symbolizing the shift, the talk concluding with data proving equitable companies outperformed by 25% in retention and 35% in customer engagement, challenging attendees, examine your blind spots. If your leadership doesn't reflect and uplift your workforce's diversity, you're not leading, you're limiting. Reflections came full circle in quiet evenings. Jamal standing at his office window overlooking the city skyline, pondering how one undercover shift had evolved into a movement, with Elena's weekly updates detailing new initiatives like supplier diversity programs favoring minority entrepreneurs, echoing his startup days, and stories of employees like Louise advancing to regional roles, proving the power of inclusive pipelines. The narrative inspired broader advocacy, with Jamal partnering with civil rights organizations to lobby for anti-bias labor laws, and on a personal note, he hosted Miguel at the store for a Future Leader Day, the boy's wide-eyed wonder reminding him why equity mattered not for metrics, but for generations unshackled from cycles of exclusion, culminating in a company culture where diversity wasn't tolerated but celebrated, yielding innovations like multicultural product lines that boosted market share. Jamal's final challenge resonated in his writings and speeches. In every workplace, voices wait to be heard. Listen deeply, act justly, and watch as equity turns potential into progress, proving through lived action that empathetic, inclusive management doesn't just heal wounds, it forges unbreakable futures, spreading one transformed life at a time across industries hungry for change. After the calm declaration, "My name is Jamal, not Pal," the room seemed to dial down its volume by a notch, as if the words had subtly recalibrated the ambient noise. And he continued walking, each step on the marble deliberate and measured, neither hurried nor languid, as though he were redefining his own dimensions in a space that had long been designed to exclude him, stacks of bills sliding forward with the snap of wallets opening wide, 500 if you play the full piece, 1,000 if you don't bail in 30 seconds, the excitement clean and detached, allowing them to revel without acknowledging they were rooting for a spectacle of public diminishment. But Jamal didn't glance at the money, stating firmly, "I'm not here to perform like a trained animal, I'm not taking your wagers," then turning to the one who had issued the challenge, "I accept, and I want only one thing. If I succeed, Miss Hargrove will honor her word before everyone here," a few whistles ringing out, half mocking, half probing his resolve. Elena Hargrove lifting her chin with her smile locking into place like a mechanism, her mind scrolling rapidly through risk assessments last week's labor dispute. The unpredictable journalist in the room, the new donor to impress, she thought in graphs and headlines, not in individuals. If he faltered, the room would laugh it off. Done. If he was passable, spin it as a night of uncovering hidden potential. What she wasn't accustomed to was an employee insisting she uphold her promise. Jamal reaching the foot of the stage where two security guards immediately stepped forward, blocking him habitually. "Sir, this area is for performers and guests only." Their tone polite, the barrier soft yet tangible. Jamal halting without argument, tilting his head to draw their attention to the left where a white couple leaned casually over the stage edge, snapping selfies with the Steinway as a backdrop, unhindered by anyone. The guards hesitating for a beat before resuming their positions in front of him. The brief moment laying bare the room's inherent skew, the same rule enforced selectively for one individual. At the hall's edge, Harriet Thompson witnessing it with lips pressed thin. This wasn't the first such instance. A deep, clear male voice cutting through. "Let him through." Samuel Lee, the music critic, having been standing nearby, not raising his volume but shifting his shoulder slightly. "Tonight, I want to hear music, not watch barriers shift." The guards exchanging glances, then stepping half aside, opening the path, but still flanking him, as if escorting a potential variable in motion, Elena's brow tightening just a fraction, disliking anyone else setting the tempo, public relations touching her sleeve to murmur, "Better if Lee speaks up, it adds credibility." Elena inhaling and resetting her smile to its practiced configuration, the one she'd perfected over a lifetime of turning emotions into protocols. A female guest muttering, "They should wipe down the piano too," perspiration and all. A light remark with underlying bitterness, a courteous comment carrying ingrained preconceptions. Jamal removing his gloves and folding them neatly onto the tray, a small decisive act, like shedding an unseen uniform, looking up at Elena. "Let's confirm one last time. You said if I play better than a professional pianist, you'll marry me. I don't want that. I want you to honor your word publicly in some meaningful way." A male guest laughing. "Smart. Customizing the prize." Another adding, "Honor her word how?" With a donation. Jamal shaking his head. "I don't need a donation. I need proof that statements here hold value." Samuel Lee nodding in agreement. "You're referring to public accountability." "Yes." In Elena's eyes, a flicker of hesitation then vanished. Around the room, phones raised with tiny lights blinking. The risk chart running again. Labor hashtags. Conservative stakeholders. She smiled, stamping it closed. "We're all witnesses here." Samuel Lee following. "And if he performs at a professional level, I'll state so to the press." A few short bursts of applause. Part of the room ready to appreciate principle over show. Jamal nodding and stepping onto the riser, one guard instinctively edging closer. Jamal not acknowledging him, only the path ahead. For years it had always been obstructed by mechanisms cloaked in courtesy. Tonight he was traversing it under his own identity. "Let him through." Samuel Lee repeated, as if placing a period at the end of the directive, the guard freezing, then moving to the side. Below the selfie couple, still joking about white keys, black keys, no one quieting them, the entire room's eyes on one man, its expectations gathered for a stumble. Jamal standing before the Steinway Model D, placing his palm on the lid, cool, solid, familiar, not opening it yet, looking down, addressing the challenger by name. "Miss Hargrove, I want to hear you say one thing clearly." "I will honor my word." For the first time that evening, Elena missing half a beat, unaccustomed to reciting lines scripted by another, but in front of too many cameras with public relations nodding to secure the narrative, she lifted her chin. "I will honor my word." The final syllable, thin as wire, both a pledge and a boundary. Harriet releasing a breath only Jamal noticed. He lifting the lid, the hinge emitting a soft, clean click. In the front row, a woman whispering to her companion, "What if he actually can play?" The friend shrugging, "Then we've got an engaging tale." They still discussing a tale, not a person. Elena maintaining her smile, her thumb brushing the now dry champagne mark. the fatigue at her neck base from lengthy meetings, urgent emails, challenging stakeholders, having spilled into a challenge as effortless as a finger snap, a discordant thought crossing her mind. Why had she tossed that line so casually? Then the public relations logic overlaying it again. If he's skilled, we uncover talent. If not, the room laughs, win-win somewhere. The concept of respect, still waiting outside the threshold, Jamal drawing out the bench and seating himself, checking his distance from the keys, dropping his shoulders, loosening his wrists, old rituals returning like ingrained memory, speaking loud enough for the first rows to catch, "Thank you for making space." It sounding courteous, but those impacted would grasp he was addressing the guards and a system that had long confined him to the hall's margins. The crowd steadying with a few jabs, "Get on with it, don't keep us waiting." At the fringe, the man from earlier murmuring, "Look, his hands are trembling." His companion replying, "Of course they are, who wouldn't?" Samuel Lee offering a small smile, "Trembling or not, the music will resolve it." Jamal positioning his fingertips on the keys, merely touching, not pressing the air, feeling taut and fragile as if awaiting a break. He having declined the money made, "I will honor my word." Echo before witnesses, and traversed the barrier under his name. All that remained was the piano's sound, and when it arrived it came not with clamor, but with a breath that seemed to caress the air itself. Jamal striking the first key as if gently tapping water's surface, no ostentatious flourishes, no elaborate runs, just a pure note. Then a second that invited summertime to enter, he selecting a tempo, half a beat slower than standard, granting each phrase breathing room, his left hand laying a soft foundation like bare feet on a warm sidewalk, his right hand speaking sparingly, each note falling with precisely the required weight. The pedal pressed, briefly released, swiftly allowing resonance to cling to the hall's marble before dissipating like mist. Jamal not narrating a story, but placing sentences, the silences between them not obstructing the listener's ears but drawing them nearer. In the second row, the man who had joked about white keys, black keys, leaving his smile, suspended mid-air, then folding inward, extinguished like a candle under glass. His champagne ceasing to tremble, a woman recording video tapping her phone off, placing it face down as if fearing to create disturbance, the room's laughter not vanishing abruptly but shrinking, drying, and retreating to the peripheries, Samuel Lee leaning forward, his trained eye overlooking nothing. The manner in which Jamal anchored a low note to maintain the line's center, the way he bypassed flashy technical displays in favor of restraint, beautiful touch, warm tone. Not warmth via tricks, but through intention, a performer who knows what he's conveying and to whom, Samuel noting how Jamal bent two blue notes, at precisely the right instance holding and releasing them, so a familiar melody became unfamiliar anew. In the front row, Elena Hargrove keeping her polite smile, but her jaw softening a degree, she having prepared two tidy scenarios to shape the narrative, yet this sound fitting neither from a faint seam of memory, she seeing herself at 10, seated at the old upright at home, her elderly teacher pressing her hand down and saying, "Silence is also a note." Young Elena having disliked that lesson back then. Silence meaning absence, no funds, no influence, no acclaim, but now the silence. Jamal infused into the room carrying a different gravity, the Steinway responding to him as if they had been acquaintances for years in the bridge. Jamal tilting the harmony into shade. Not obscurity, just profundity. Holding a single note long enough for attendees to realize they were anticipating, and that instant shifting the room from a crowd eager for entertainment into an audience truly listening, servers slowing their paces, security guards relaxing their stances. The public relations representative for the first time that night, ceasing to monitor her mental metrics, Jamal gazing at no one, his posture serene, shoulders eased back, comfortable eyes occasionally half closed, not in affected performance, but because he was attuning to how the notes interacted with the walls echoing back like waves, he not presenting an image of himself, but reclaiming his essence, each phrase he delivered, rewriting a line on a resume that had been struck through. No more pal, no more you there, no more individuals like you here in this instant was Jamal. Ellis, a man with a name, with a voice, from her position at the hall's edge, Harriet Thompson's eyes glistening when Jamal gliding into a minor embellishment, she thinking of all the mornings she'd observed, staff clocking in, each carrying a life. No one inquired about she feeling this music, accompanying them as if someone had emerged from the service corridor, placed a chair amid the red carpet, and invited, "Sit, tell me," somewhere across the room, the hum of the HVAC background noise. Everyone had tolerated, fading from awareness, the man with the cigar lowering his hand, a woman adjusting her shawl and forgetting to complete the motion, leaving her fingers resting idly in her lap, someone beginning to sigh, then halting afraid to spill whatever delicate balance teetered on the moment's edge, Elena, glancing at the champagne patch on her gown, now dried into a faint ridge, wanting to contemplate image impact and media prospects. But the idea refusing to coalesce, she, realizing she lacked prepared words for this, having believed everything could be categorized. KPI ROI sentiment. But this music categorizing her in return. Not heiress, not future executive, not net worth bundle. It's summoning a person from behind the facade. The sensation as disconcerting as touching a long-neglected place, Jamal circling a brief variation, then releasing the urge to showcase, stopping before the coda as if at a crossroads, choosing the simpler route home, returning the melody to its origin without adornment, a cultural choice, summertime in hands, not a finger drill, but a portal into a stream of recollection, porches in warm weather, front steps, voices softening the day's edges, he not needing to articulate cultural heritage, anyone with ears could perceive its flow for a moment, he looking up and catching Harriet's eyes. No smile, no nod, just a glance, affirming he knew she was there, and thus knew all like her. Those hands polishing floors to a shine since dawn were present too, Samuel Lee listening intently enough to note what was omitted. He silently measuring the pause lengths between phrases, the way Jamal returned to the tonic without delay. This no accident but a deliberate selection. He dipping his head, slightly as if accepting an invisible accord, maturity in music residing not in addition but in omission. When the final note descended, Jamal lifting the pedal, letting the sound fade entirely. No exclamation, no spectacle, just a modest period. And then silence. Not the awkward silence of a champagne spill, not the vacant silence of nothing to express this silence, having shifted hue, deep, warm, tangible, the room, seeming to inhale collectively, a single clap emerging, then halting like a knock, recalling someone might be resting, Jamal not turning to the audience for validation, sitting still, hands loose in his lap, eyes on no particular point. His posture conveying the remainder, I am not here to validate. I am here to identify myself, edged out of the frame to identify dignity that wears no uniform in the front row. Elena sensing an inner voice, one she typically suppressed with her schedule, stirring, what have I just done to this individual? The query not stopping at Jamal, sweeping over all the staff she passed daily without seeing over. The directives like, use the service elevator, stay out of the photo line, leaving a faint chill at her neck. She looking up at the chandelier, the light that had always aligned with her, and for the first time that night perceiving it as impartial, a young server, tray in hand, standing frozen as if enchanted, swallowing, hard eyes shining for unnamed reasons beside her, the guard who had instinctively blocked Jamal, letting his elbows drop, he not apologizing, not needing to the silence. Performing that function, Jamal touching a brief closing chord not to extend, but to ground the room after the curve it had just navigated. Then lifting his hands from the keys, lowering the lid, one notch, without fully closing, turning his head to locate Samuel Lee. They not speaking, a single nod, encapsulating the entire exchange. I am still here, any laughter, if persisting now at the margins, at the room's core, a new quiet one, sculpted by music, and left like fertile soil for what might grow next in that space. Quips about, white and black keys finding no room because people had just heard something transcending key colors, Jamal inhaling, exhaling, not rising, letting the room recalibrate its pulse, and in the front row, Elena the hostess, who had flung a marriage challenge like a stone into a pond, feeling every ripple returning to her shore, understanding that, from here onward, every word she uttered would need to pass through this silence. The first piece concluded, the room changed palette, and the control Elena believed was hers quietly shifting toward the piano, the transformed silence not yet dissipated, when Jamal, tilting his head as if listening to the room once more, not standing, simply rolling his wrists, resetting his key distance, and switching languages from the lilt of summer to the pristine architecture of classics. A sonata, the framework of discipline coming alive. The opening theme, crisp, clear, allegro moto, Jamal's left hand, constructing a rhythmic wall, with evenly rolled chords, mechanical in accuracy, yet never agrison, overpowering his right hand, sketching a fine cantabile line, delicate yet assured, he using the pedal sparingly, releasing it at exact cut points. So each transition revealed its structure. Instead of being veiled in emotional haze, the room, accustomed to being fed sensations, finding itself unconsciously. Counting along with him, the man with the cigar lowering it from his lips, placing it carefully in the ashtray, as if smoke might blur the clean lines, an older woman, tilting her head, narrowing her eyes, the reflex of someone who had once studied piano, verifying the voicing in the back row. A young man lowering his phone, forgetting vertical mode altogether, perhaps the clip no longer seeming sufficient. Samuel Lee shifting half a foot, leaning in to capture more of the mid-range, noting the rare control smooth legato on the fourth and fifth fingers, trills clean without errant notes, the climb from PP to FF without a gasp in the gasp. Development section, Jamal, carving the theme into fragments, rotating and reassembling them, the dynamic arc ascending by intellect, not adrenaline. Samuel exhaling softly almost to himself. Virtuoso. The word dropping in 2 beats. Cautious, then. Certain, Jamal not aiming to capture hearts but building a bridge. Those who arrived for amusement, realizing midway they stood before art, the faint shifting of chairs subsiding, the guard who had blocked him earlier, lowering his shoulders for the first time that night, his eyes not vigilant but following. Elena Hargrove sitting upright, the smile on her face like an outdated mask, with each phrase feeling the invisible dashboard in her mind. KPI headlines. Sentiment losing signal for seconds before flickering back, she glancing at public. Relations, that's sufficient, isn't it? The other's eyes wavering, if we cut at the peak, we'll face backlash. Elena bristling at a scenario beyond her grasp, wanting to impose the period to return the night to her outlined plan. In the coda, Jamal letting the arpeggios pass like a breeze breaking on the dynamic stair, just before forte, then declining to ascend, returning the phrase to piano with a cadence as clean as a demarcation line. This, the power of restraint. Knowing where volume could be applied and opting otherwise, another silence, this time applause erupting immediately afterward, sharp and robust. Not the polite clapping of a gala, but acknowledgement, a few people half rising, then an entire row, standing, preconceptions, not erased, but simply retreating, glancing for supporters, Samuel Lee lowering his chin by precisely a centimeter, a professional's signal angling slightly toward the waiting cameras. A professional standard, no waving, no overstatement. An invisible text line just signed and sealed, a few reporters. Exchanging looks, they having their pull, quote, Elena sensing control, slipping like sand through fingers, standing in the natural lull, clipping the mic to her lapel. Thank you, she beginning, voice smooth as glass. A truly impressive display. Now lets her words drowned by a solitary shout more, another encore, the crowd she had guided from the evening start, now charting its own course, public relations swiveling toward her. Let him do one more, Elena, she pressing her jaw, thumb unconsciously rubbing the dried champagne mark. Back to tasks, Elena, saying quietly, mic off, aimed solely at Jamal, her final attempt to snap the rein. Jamal looking at her for a beat, not defiant, not submissive, Just observing the gaze, not heated but edged you. Just said you'd honor your word. In the front row, a few guests turning to one another, they having heard enough even without the mic. Her expression having conveyed it, an older woman silent until now. Speaking clearly, we'd like to hear more a heavy-set man who eagerly wagered earlier, nodding rapidly. Yes, more the young man in the back, reactivating his camera. But this time to capture music, not a slip. The guard glancing at his superior, the latter shrugging and moving to the periphery. Room's center of gravity, having shifted from the hostess to the man at the piano, Elena setting the mic down, her smile returning but thinner, almost translucent inside, hearing a faint crack. The image, the shell she inhabited fracturing at the seam, worrying about stakeholders' tomorrow's headlines, the donor dinner, but simultaneously an uninvited query, arising, why do I want to truncate this, the schedule, or because I can't tolerate someone who doesn't belong redefining the space? Jamal swiveling his bench slightly, remaining on stage, looking over the rows, calling for more, not to collect approving glances, but to gauge the collective breath, finding Samuel Lee catching each other's gaze amid the murmurs, Samuel giving a small nod, another invisible endorsement, Jamal placing his hands on the keys, but before playing speaking just loud enough for the first rows to hear, "Thank you, I won't add more noise, I'll let the music fulfill its role." He inclining his head toward Elena, a polite gesture, without yielding, "I respect you, and I remember your promise." He cueing the third piece in his mind, one that would tax both technique and endurance, but not rushing silence. Having just learned its function, let it operate one more beat, phones. Lifting again, but angles. Altered now, people aiming for the ascent, not the descent at the edge. Harriet Thompson laying a hand over her heart. A smile just beginning at her lips. She seeing the other servers standing a bit taller, as if the spine of the entire evening shift had been realigned. The guard who often blocked Jamal, stepping back another half pace, not in apprehension but so as not to obscure the emerging outline. Elena sitting down, public relations, whispering the revised agenda. We'll term this a special set. After this next piece you step in to thank him and announce the auction. Elena nodding eyes, never leaving Jamal's hands, she not knowing if hoping he'd falter to reclaim dominance or excel, so she wouldn't have to maintain it anymore. Jamal lowering his wrists, the opening theme of the next piece, not yet sounded, but the room already leaning toward the piano somewhere. The sense of sport having slipped from grasp what remained art, and the people before it no longer. Concealing behind their roles. He closing his eyes for half a second, just enough to hear the internal clock click into alignment. Then opening them, striking the first note, the room like a sail, catching ideal wind swelling, and the night decisively shifting into a new trajectory, the very first note landing, and the entire room leaning toward the piano, a Jamal locking the door behind any lingering doubt. No more lullabies, no more separate discipline architecture. He choosing an extreme technical piece, steep double note, passages long octave leaps, razor-close hand crossings, shifting 3 to 4 to 6 polyrhythms, trading roles without pause. This not a piece to sound pleasing, but a summit demanding both muscle and nerve. His left hand driving an ostinato, smooth as a belt. Drive his right hand stringing, stow beads as precise as a sewing machine. In the second section, he bending the theme into a left-hand trill, a difficult, rarely chosen maneuver, while the right hand walked the high register like a tightrope, the pedal dotted only at phrase, openings lifted before any clouding could occur, even on repeated note runs. He using a wrist rotary instead of arm, keeping speed without breaking sound. Everything control, no strain evident, the audience holding its breath facing visible challenge, the man who had once joked about white keys, black keys, drawing his hand away from his glass, the security guard who had blocked Jamal earlier, now unconsciously leaning forward. Harriet Thompson gripping the edge of a table, the pulse in her wrist, evident in each beat, the public relations, woman looking up from her screen, abandoning an unsent message, laughter having slipped from the room long ago, what remained attention. Elena Hargrove trying to to erect a mental fence swiftly. This was her event. This her story to narrate if necessary, interrupt. But the music belonging to no fence, taking its own route through the chandeliers, through the cameras, past the KPI formulas in the coda, Jamal pushing a tremolo octave to the edge of forte, then not breaking through, reining it in, detouring into a short glissando, returning the phrase to piano like a graceful halt, command the break so smooth, the whole hall feeling as if it slid half a step further, silence one beat two. Then an explosion, a thick unified standing ovation erupting the front row. Standing then, the back chairs clattering glasses, chiming but no one minding phones rising like a forest, no longer hunting for a fall but clinging to a moment at the stage's edge, Samuel Lee clapping half a beat slower than the rest as if to measure it precisely, then speaking just loud enough to be caught by a recording mic at a very high professional level, Jamal remaining seated hands loose, he not bowing yet giving the room back to itself, the commotion theirs. Elena taking the mic. "Thank you," she commencing, but the clapping not dropping, one group of guests shouting encore, another calling Jamal, she trying again, her voice smooth, we. This time the applause surging like a wave, not antagonistic, just not hers in this instant. Public relations whispering at her shoulder, "Don't interrupt now," her phone buzzing incessantly internal, messages, social tags, an email, from legal counsel, avoid binding statements. Marriage, a personal legal matter from mid-hall. A man's voice ringing out. "You said you'd marry him if he played better than a pro." Another following, "Honor your word," several cameras. Pivoting to her face. Stage lights, catching the rise and fall of her collarbones with each breath. She remembering exactly the, "I will honor my word." She'd uttered earlier words. Jamal had compelled her to repeat, they feeling like a lock, now clasped around her wrist. Not a legal shackle, but an ethical one in her head. Two dashboards colliding reputation. Stakeholders, donors, lawyers. On one side, a room of witnesses, a respected critic's professional level on the other, and a video already viral. She, knowing legally, the jest meant nothing. Marriage couldn't be compelled. She could dismiss it as exaggeration, but in the court of public ethics, she cornered evading, and the story becoming promises made then broken, she'd be locked into an irrational, dangerous personal decision. Jamal, rising just as the clapping dipped a notch, he not walking to the mic, bowing slightly enough to honor the standing room, then looking straight at Elena, no demand, no pressure, just the reminder in his gaze, "The words are yours to uphold." Samuel Lee stepping half out of his row, speaking at a clippable volume. From a professional standpoint, he just performed at a level I'd gladly endorse. In print, no more, no less. It the exact stamp tightening the ethical lock. A few donor faces turning to each other. They knowing Lee's words carried weight. A public relations nudging the mic toward Elena. We discuss honoring commitments and supporting talent. Flip the narrative, her phone lighting up again. An investor, inquiring what's happening, a journalist requesting a statement. Corporate counsel texting, "Do not confirm marriage intent." Elena flashing back to her teens the first time. Told, "Don't let anyone steer you, keep hands on the wheel. Now the music steering will pause." Here she, attempting but another room corner, responding no more. The crowd not rude but united, and that unity through applause. Through the critic's endorsement demanding she confront her own words, Jamal lifting his hand signaling for quiet one more moment, he saying just enough, "I don't need a wedding. I need people to uphold their commitments." The line reframing the debate from marital law back to the ethics of speech. Something everyone grasped, everyone could judge an older woman clear-voiced with authority calling out, "You can uphold your word another way, but you must uphold it." Several heads nodding a way out, cracking open, no forced marriage but no broken pledge. Either Elena swallowing, hard. She not cruel, trained to win and winning in her lexicon, meaning never losing control in this moment. She having to learn a new term, right? Not the right move, but the right thing. A second standing ovation, rising this one for the slop-topper, etc. Knight's redefinition, even the security guard clapping offbeat but sincere. Harriet dabbing her eye corner with a napkin edge. Samuel Lee pocketing his phone as if submitting testimony at the hall's edge. An elderly lady squinting. Know him? Her neighbor leaning in. I think he was at the conservatory. Jamal Ellis. The words threading into the night's taut fabric, a cut that would drop the next act, revealing his identity and past. Elena hearing conservatory, and feeling her neck tense. If the story turning to forgotten prodigy, every eye swinging back to judge her, not just for a harsh jest but for power misuse, she's setting the mic down and taking a long breath before her. No longer a gala but an ethics trial, and the jury already standing staring directly at her. Jamal returning to the piano, resting his hands on the lid as if closing the performance file. He not taking the mic, letting the silence do the next task, forcing the room's power holders to hear their own breathing, the room staying still for one more beat as if confirming from here on every word would carry weight. The silence forged by naming had barely settled when an older woman's voice rose softly from the hall's edge. I know him. Heads turning, she stepping forward, half a pace, adjusting her glasses. Jamal Ellis, the name slipping free of the PALU labels and dropping into the room like a latch clicking into place, a few people mouthing it back to themselves, savoring a restored identity. He performed at the City Theater when he was 22. She said firmly that, encore. I remember it vividly, a silver-haired man in gold frames nodding yes. The music press hailed him as emerging talent. A younger guest pulling out his phone, typing swiftly, the screen illuminating with an old photo. A young man in a black suit bowing before a Dodd-end party. Piano Samuel Lee, narrowing his eyes, delving into his professional recall. I read that review and I recall a master class. My instructor mentioned your name. He turning to Jamal, nodding slightly, as if confirming a thread that had never truly snapped Elena Hargrove's breath, stuttering half a beat. She looking to public relations for info. The other checking her phone. Whispering old photos are surfacing. Number Jamal Ellis. Just surged Elena's own phone. Buzzing an email from legal. No public statements on marriage. A text from an investor, what's going on. But the one line she couldn't sidestep was the name Jamal Ellis, rolling steadily in her mind, pushing aside terms like KPI sentiment, ROI, the space widening around Jamal, he standing straight, dipping his head slightly as if apologizing for the recognition, Harriet Thompson stepping half a pace from the edge, her hand gripping the corner of a napkin. She hesitating, this wasn't something to parade before a crowd, but she had just watched him turned into a crowd of the TC. Punchline, she raising her voice enough to carry. If we're discussing Jamal, let me share the rest the room, quieting instinctively before a household voice with years behind it. Jamal's mother was ill for a long time, Harriet saying, plainly adding no tears, they lived on two shifts, hers and his. When her condition worsened, the medical bills arrived like a storm. His first piano, the one he'd saved for through scholarships and side jobs, sold to cover hospital costs. A woman bringing her hand to her mouth, a man, slowly setting his glass on the table. Harriet looking at Jamal as if seeking permission. He nodding, eyes closing for a beat. She continuing, he left the conservatory, took night-cleaning jobs to pay rent, pay debts, survive, and music. Harriet, searching for the words, music became linked to the scent of antiseptic, to white sheets, to the beeps of monitors. He locked it away. Samuel Lee adding a piece, professional but warm talent doesn't disappear. It buries itself when lacking sustenance. He looking around, phrasing it where non-musicians could comprehend. Harriet, lowering her gaze, then lifting it again, her face firming. And this isn't solely about hardship. She clipping the words, someone once told him after an audition, we need someone who suits the venue. Hair should to be neater. Don't play with so much vibrancy. Your presence needs to be more polished. She, not exaggerating those words, polite and perilous for that very reason. Another time, a guard blocked him at a stage door, forced him to use the service stairs, even with an invitation in hand, a soft gasp escaping from the third row, then subsiding, some guests looking at each other, their own words to staff, suddenly materializing in print before them, the barrier here, not brick but etiquette wired into the psyche, Jamal. Hearing his name repeated in the room, Jamal, not pal, each time a small hammer tapping at old paint, he drawing in a deep breath, holding it, releasing, he not wanting tonight to become his personal tragedy on display. But Harriet not, telling a sob tale, she naming the issue, the polished system that had pushed him to the margins, Elena's mind flashing to the checklist she'd circulated internally. Staff remain out of frame use service. Elevator don't linger in. The lobby during guest arrivals, she, wanting to defend. That's standard procedure, not bias, but behind that thought coming another quieter. One who authors the procedure. She looking at Jamal and unbidden, seeing the simplicity in his stance, contrasted with the complexity of the glass casing around her own life, Samuel Lee, giving a small nod to Harriet, a thank you for stating it plainly, he adding the professional credential at the conservatory. He topped the piano class 2 semesters running. He said, I have an old note from a professor, profound touch. Broad ear pedal. Control rare for his age. He not mentioning the times Jamal lost funding because he didn't match the program's image, the phrase too sharp to launch now. But the attentive having already connected it, when Harriet said suits the venue, a middle-aged man frowning that still occurs today, another side, it never ceased. Just speaks a different dialect. Shame rare at a gala now. Present, not loud but weighty. Elena lifting the mic, then setting of it down, knowing anything she said now would be filtered through the ethical lens. Just raised. She glancing at public relations, the other shaking her head. Don't justify. Listen. It advice unfamiliar to someone who lived by directing, but tonight, silence again in the right place. Harriet concluding her voice. Steady. He doesn't require anyone's sympathy. He only needs to be addressed by his name, and not barred from doors that should already be open. She, turning to Jamal, smiling tonight. You opened one. Yourself with music. Jamal nodding eyes, moist but steady. He looking around the room at people who had laughed earlier now. Sitting upright at the guard who had blocked him. Now, slightly inclining his head at Elena, her face blank for a rare second, like someone glimpsing her true reflection. I didn't abandon music because I stopped loving it, Jamal said, speaking about himself for the first time that night, his voice low clear. I left because every note I played transported me back to the hospital room I needed. Something straightforward: pay rent, pay debt, survive. He pausing tonight. I remembered why I learned to play, not for applause, but to be a person, the line clicking a second lock in the room, a recognition no longer about skill becoming consensus, that before them stood a complete human being at the hall's edge. The woman who initiated the recognition saying softly, We've lost you for too long. Samuel Lee replying as if entering it into record from now on. Document it correctly. Jamal Ellis Jamal, nodding a faint smile. Elena Hargrove, standing amid waves opposing her. She, knowing the game had changed. No more cut at the public relations. Beat no more, rewrite the narrative with a few neat lines before her. A man who had reset the measure of dignity. And behind her in the day. Phone still vibrating, a world demanding she uphold her word in its authentic sense. The night from here, not returning to its old framework, and the next act. Media storm pressure, closed-door discussions already standing just behind the door. That had been called open. The say his name silence had barely closed when the hall erupted in a storm of phone alert screens, lighting up in scattered blue dots, push notifications pinging without pause. A young man shouting, "It's on TikTok," another adding, "X is," flooded with clips on several phones. The same headline repeating, "Heiress mocks black custodian." Then he plays like a genius beneath it. Number swelling by the second. Number Jamal Ellis. Number Honor Your Word. Number Hargrove Elite. One viral edit, cutting Elena's marriage challenge directly against Jamal's summertime and Sonata performance, a fast-moving news account slapping a small chyron across the bottom, publicly pledged marriage at the door. Security reporting news vans outside, reporters requesting entry, the hotel's public relations fielding calls. Stacked on calls, legal messaging urgently, absolutely no confirmation of any marriage. All statements must be neutral. Two blades of social media sticking out at once on one side, comments demanding fairness, piling up respect, dignity, honor your word. Incredible. Jamal on the other, the shadow side, swelling, mockery, digging into his personal life, doctored images, turning hardship into circus. Even the applause clipped into meme format. Elena feeling control, slip away like coat buttons, popping loose. The metrics dashboard in her head, sentiment, reach risk, flashing red, green like a trading floor. An investor texting bluntly, "Don't let personal matters become corporate commitments. Legal writing, marriage, is a personal matter, cannot be publicly binding." Public relations leaning close to whisper one wrong word, and we'll spend a week cleaning up in front of the piano. Jamal standing still, watching the crowd spiraling into a vortex of clips. This, not what he had built tonight for he looking up, voice calm but clear enough to carry. "We're turning tonight into a spectacle," a few heads jerking up. He turning to Elena, "I suggest we speak privately, not to conceal, but to move from ridicule to rectifying a ripple of dissent. No. Say it here. Honor your word before everyone." Samuel Lee, raising his hand for quiet. "If you want the right resolution, both sides need to converse like adults." He not shielding anyone, protecting the quality of the decision. Harriet Thompson adding a half sentence, leaning toward conscience. "Let them talk." Elena meeting Jamal's eyes. No pleading, no threat, just an invitation, a string inside her slackening. She giving the smallest nod, public relations mapping it instantly. Manager's office, second floor, security opening a path through the sea of people and cameras, forming a corridor out of elbows and polite murmurs, a few shouts following, but Samuel Lee stepping in with a soft block. "You'll get your resolution, give them 5 minutes." The front row falling quiet, stepping back half a pace. The cyclone swinging off Jamal's heels and fixing on Elena's back. The office door shutting the noise, dropping like a dialed-down volume knob. Elena leaning against the table, thumb rubbing the faded champagne stain. A tense habit, her phone glowing with incoming calls and texts. Legal team, public relations group, 2 shareholders, a reporter, Jamal, not sitting, standing, a measured distance from the desk, hands loosely clasped. "I'm not here to force you into a wedding, Jamal. Beginning plainly, I want you to honor your word the right way to the individual and to the culture of this place." Elena looking up, "Honor your word. Can that be quantified?" Her tone, smooth but dry, years of experience telling her everything had to be converted into measurable units before it could be managed. Jamal nodding it. "Can one? A public apology. Use my name. Acknowledge the action and its impact. None of that. If anyone was offended, language, 2 concrete commitments, he, counting them off on his priced fingers, the Ellis Family Scholarship Fund for underprivileged music students, quarterly free community concerts, and bias awareness training for management. Starting with you." He pausing, eyes steady. 3 procedural change. Remove the keep. Staff out of frame rule call. Employees by name, stop blocking service elevators without cause. Set up listening sessions with frontline staff and an anonymous channel, Elena hearing, training listening, drop procedures, and feeling a flicker of irritation, these to her synonyms for losing control, she swallowing the reflex and asking, "And your part? I take no money. I take an opportunity to return to music, to play for the public, especially where music is rare. I'll advise you on building a culture of respect not on stage but in hallways, in emails, in meeting agendas, in Elena's mind. Two voices wrestling the old voice. This is a crisis. Shut it down. Forget it. The new one quiet, but right. This is your one chance to do something that matters." She looking at Jamal, realizing what unsettled her most. Not his demands, but his precise calm. No begging, no bargaining. He's setting the standard, her phone buzzing again. Legal only. Say, respect for talent, commitment to inclusion. Avoid honor. Your word too risky. Public relations. If we pivot to scholarship plus programs, positive spin, possible investor, avoid setting a precedent. These arrows all pointing to a safe path, speak smoothly. Do little, but that's safe, now dangerous. The crowd, having already heard, honor your word, dodging it. Would pour fuel if I do this. Elena, asking slowly, will it be seen as admitting a systemic fault? Jamal, if the system has a fault, admitting it is the only start to fixing it. She hesitating a beat at the simplicity of it. She'd been taught, since childhood, to win, not to admit, but tonight winning meant being right about that line. I said I'll marry you. Jamal, no one has the right to force marriage. You can honor your word in the human sense. Use your power to lift, not to press down. The words settling into the room like a weight that fit exactly, not ornate clear. They pausing the far-off noise outside the hall like surf behind glass. Elena for the first time, letting go of the champagne stain under her thumb. I need one thing. I don't want to become a character in someone else's clip. If I agree, I'll say it in my own words, Jamal. All I need is for it to be done. The words yours, the work ours, the door cracking open, public relations poking her head in. They're waiting. TV's already inside. Samuel Lee, standing just outside, not crossing the threshold, asking, "Only are you two all right?" Jamal looking to Elena, she taking a long breath, not for show but to choose. I'll apologize, announce the scholarship fund, the community, concert program management training and procedural changes, she said crisply, like listing an investment portfolio. Only this time investing in people. She looking up at Jamal, you come with me. But when I speak Jamal. I'll stand there to confirm with my name when needed. Elena tapping out a quick message prep statement. No marriage mention, emphasize, honor your word through action, legal sending back a draft, unconditional apology, plus specific commitments. She reading it, deleting the hedging phrase if anyone was offended, replacing it with I was wrong. A small move, but it stung before opening the door. Elena pausing, asking half for business, half for truth. If I slip, what will you do? Jamal, remind you of your word before everyone. She nodding a nod, accepting a binding. She'd spent her career avoiding the door, swinging open noise, cameras, lights, flooding in like a tide. The social media storm still there, sharp and cold. But at its center, a small space just agreed upon a shift from ridicule to rectifying. And that would be the measure of what came next. Whether she would honor her word in action before a city, now watching the doors swinging open, and lights and cameras rushing in like a tide. But instead of retreating, Elena stopping squarely at the mic, Jamal angling just too crude, her right close enough to share the din, far enough not to steal the frame. Samuel Lee standing front row like an official seal, and Harriet Thompson remaining at the hall's edge, still holding the corner of her napkin. Elena looking around the room, inhaling, and, this time, not reading from the safe draft. Tonight I was wrong. I disrespected Jamal Ellis, failed to call him by name, turned my own employee into a shadow. I apologized to him, and to everyone we have ever treated as invisible. The I was wrong. Dropping into the room clean with no, if anyone was offended, Cushion public relations holding its breath, legal firing off messages, but it too late. In a good way, she going on steady about the line, "I'll marry you, marriage is not something to be wagered. I will honor my word the right way through action. Starting tonight, I'm announcing a program of rebuilding and reform the room," leaning toward the mic. Some cameras turning to capture Jamal. He neither nodding nor shaking his head, letting the program words run their full course first. Elena said, "We're establishing the Ellis Family Scholarship for talented music students, without resources with priority for underrepresented communities. The fund will be run by an independent board. Hargrove Group is just the sponsor." She pausing half a beat. "I want that name to outlast this evening, a single clap breaking out, not polite, but the reflex of seeing a door being built second." She raising her head, "We'll launch the Keys for Respect Community Concert Series. In Bronx and Queens, free admission, full union pay for musicians and crew. Jamal Ellis will open the first show, and we commit to bringing music to places that rarely hear it." Jamal turning to her and saying quietly, "That's the part I agree to." Cameras catching it, quietly anchoring it to the official record. Third, Elena said, mandatory anti-bias DEI training for all management. Starting with me, we'll hire an independent firm, conduct anonymous pre- and post-surveys, and publish the results of Prian's skeptical hum sounding somewhere PR stunt. But Samuel Lee tilting his head as if marking it measurable means accountable. Fourth, her tone hardening. "I'm scrapping the staff must not appear in frame rule when not required and removing service elevator blockages in non-security areas starting tomorrow. All managers will address staff by name." She's scanning the room. Anyone who doesn't stay. A wave of murmurs rippling through staff at the edges, a few instinctively adjusting their name badges as if to make them visible. Fifth, Elena pausing, then saying plainly, "We're raising our minimum wage to a true living wage per city standards and adding health stipends for night shifts. Deadline next quarter." An involuntary gasp escaping the crowd. This no longer PR. This budget 6th, she slowing every month. "I'll hold a listening session with frontline staff, with an anonymous channel direct to the executive board. No polished reports, only truth." Elena lowering the mic a fraction, then raising it again. "And finally, I'm inviting Jamal Ellis to serve as my independent human values advisor for 1 year. Call it humility coaching. He'll have the right to say what I don't want to hear, and I'll be responsible for listening." A faint smile passing over Jamal's face, not for winning but for the right thing being named. Camera shutters snapping, a reporter calling out, "Do you admit you discriminated?" Elena inhaling, "I admit bias exists in my organization and in me. I take responsibility for fixing it. Not perfect for legal, but right. For ethics." Faces that had smirked earlier falling silent. Jamal asking for the mic only for a few seconds. "Thank you. I don't need a wedding. I need what's been promised to be done. I accept the advisor role not to grade but to ask, how do we treat people when the cameras are off?" He handing the mic back clean. Harriet tilting her head, eyes wet but cheeks dry. She leaning toward Elena as she's stepping down. "Thank you for saying I was wrong. From tomorrow, call me Harriet." Elena hesitating, then nodding, "Yes, Miss Harriet." The hierarchy flipped but into its right place in the front row. Samuel Lee speaking just loud enough for the mics to pick up for the background of clips. "This isn't a fairy tale. This is governance. And governance means measuring promises by actions, a definition. Planted among the forest of hashtags, still the other side of social media, scratched number PR stunt, rising alongside number honor your word. One account sneering a few concerts, and it's over. Another replying, living wage is real. The two edges of the internet running in parallel. But now, the checkpoints, drawn timelines, programs, fund name, listening session, schedule, truth. Having a place to land, public relations, handing over a rough printed timeline. Q1. Scholarship applications open next month. 2. Bronx Queens concerts 8 weeks. First DEI training next quarter. New wage table. Elena initialing the corner, not legally binding to the public, but like a self-imposed contract. A shareholder texting short-term loss. Elena replying, long-term risk reduction. She, knowing she'd have to prove it in the quarterly report, but for the first time feeling a breath of space under the pressure, Jamal turning, offering his hand, Elena shaking it. No photo op, no performance. Cameras still pressing in, but in that clasp, they splitting the weight in half. Tomorrow I'll send the schedule for the first session. Jamal said, I'll invite cleaning crews, security kitchen staff, the ones who use the service elevator, Elena nodding. And I'll take that elevator with them, the words escaping before she could stop them. But they write. A reporter throwing one last question. Do you call this honoring your word? Elena looking straight into the lens. I call this honoring my word through reform. See you when we report progress. She, setting the mic down. No bow do first, bow later. The room loosening slightly as if it had just exhaled the social media storm still screaming outside. But at the eye of it, the frame built scholarship concerts, DEI wages and benefits new policy, listening sessions, a human values, advisor things that would either take root or expose who broke their word. Jamal looking at the piano for one last beat. He wouldn't play again tonight. The music having done its work bending the room so words could enter the rest timelines and labor, and as the camera lights lowered, he seeing Elena walk to Harriet, first speaking quietly. Clearly, Miss Harriet, thank you for reminding me with the truth for the first time, calling a staff member by name before the plies and a whole hall not to be recorded. But because it was right the night, not over but law and life, having a new agreement, the rest, simple honor. The word they stepping out of the meeting room, just as the noise in the lobby cresting Elena walking, half a step ahead, but when they reaching the carpet's edge, she slowing to let Jamal come level with her public relations, handing her the mic, she not looking at the teleprompter. I'm Elena Hargrove tonight. I was wrong with Jamal Ellis and Harriet Thompson with the way I addressed you, my attitude and the harm I caused to people who should have been respected. She pausing for a beat. I apologize unconditionally, the click of cameras moving closer. She continuing shifting from words to a play. Concrete plan, specific timeline, Ellis. Family scholarship applications open on the 15th next month. Independently managed board list announced this weekend. Keys for Respect Bronx, 2 Saturday nights next week at 6:30 p.m. Queen's Sunday next week at 5 p.m. free. Admission. Full union. Pay mandatory DEI training for all management. 8 weeks. Anonymous pre- and post-surveys. Public report next quarter. No staff in photo policy ends tomorrow morning. Service elevators opened in non-security areas. Staff addressed by name, wages, and benefits. Implement city living wage and night shift health stipend by next quarter listening sessions. I will host every Monday at 9 a.m. in the B1 break room. Anonymous feedback channel goes live tonight. She closing her notebook. Looking straight ahead, our cultural KPIs will include turnover rate, internal satisfaction score, percentage of complaints resolved on time, and pay gap by function. I am personally accountable for these numbers. A ripple of surprise moved through the hall, not at rhetoric, but at deadlines and metrics being staked. Samuel Lee giving a small nod like a final stamp of authenticity. Elena lowering the mic and turning toward the staff at the edges. Miss Harriet, thank you then to the blue, white, and black uniforms tomorrow. If I call anyone, pal, remind me by my own name. There are a few small relieved laughs, but this relief, having a spine, public relations, signaling the tech team behind the stage, a large screen lighting up with a temporary poster, black background, white text, reading Keys for Respect with Jamal Ellis's name and performance dates beneath. At the bottom in small print, a community concert series by Hargrove Elite. Admission free, no flashy logo, just enough to be recognized. Elena not taking the honorary seat, stepping off the platform and finding a spot in the third row between a security guard and a waitress folding her phone face down on her lap. No more checking dashboards. The room shifting with that gesture control lowered, a notch no longer pressing, down on the music, Jamal saying nothing more, sitting at the piano lid closed by a third to sweeten the bass and soften the upper register. "This one's for second chances," he said softly. "And for those who've been made unseen, the props and 70s Azarols." Melody. He composed not ornate the opening motif, 4 notes up, a step down, a half step back home, like the way people hesitate, then decide left hand, keeping time like night shift hallway steps right hand, tracing a line so clean you could hear the space between phrases midway. He glancing a shadow of summertime, not quoted fully, just acknowledged. Then turning into a warm harmony, not sorrowful, he composing for the present, not for an old resume. Elena watching those hands, and for the first time not seeing a pros and stime stot o dub blank. Performance but effort. Effort. Like the cleaning shift she had walked past. Next to her the guard who had once blocked Jamal, resting his hand on his knee, thumbing an old wedding ring, then pulling back to avoid noise. The waitress on her left, counting time with her eyes, lips holding a faint smile in the coda. Jamal skipping the fireworks, bringing back the 4 opening notes, softer this time, like a room that had learned how to apologize properly, lifting the pedal before the last tone could cloud silence. Falling again now like a seat, just big enough for anyone to sit in applause, steady, full, but not overwhelming when it fading. Jamal rising and giving a small bow, enough to thank, not to repay a debt. He meeting Harriet's eyes, she nodding. "Well done, Jamal," he meeting. Samuel Lee replying. "See you in tomorrow's column, Elena," standing with everyone else, turning to the guard. "My name's Elena, what's yours, Darren? Nice to work with you, Darren. Tomorrow I'm taking the service." Elevator. "You'll show me the way." Darren nodding the corners of his mouth, easing awkward, like someone handed back the shape of being seen. A group of guests approaching Harriet, asking about Monday's listening session. She taking out her notebook, writing down names and saying take service, elevator B. But next week, everyone uses the front door, half joke, half truth enough, to make a few people laugh aloud. Public relations laying out a hastily printed roadmap on the check-in table, timeline, points of contact, anonymous email. Elena's signature scrolled in the corner, not for show but for accountability. A few young staff taking photos, sending them into their internal group chat. The first comment popping up, "Call me by my name." The second, "See you Monday, Samuel." Lee pausing at the keys for respect poster and telling a reporter the best script isn't hero-villain redemption. It's that after the final chord, we still have work to do it. The kind of line that dropped into the close of a news segment could slow the internet's overscripting instinct. Don't chase the ending. Wait for the report. As guests beginning to leave, the no staff in photo sign in a hidden corner taken down by tech crew, they hesitating, looking to Elena, she nodding. "Remove. It don't put it back." The empty screw hooks left, bear a visible scar of what had been wrong. Jamal staying until last, covering the keys, with the cloth hand resting a beat longer than necessary, like someone closing the door to an old home. Elena stepping up. "No mic, no cameras, thank you for not turning me into someone else's clip," she said quietly. "Tomorrow if I slip, remind me I will. And if I honor my word, remind me too." Jamal smiling. "I will, so others can see it outside New York," dropping another shade into night inside. People leaving the hall passing. The cleaning crew starting their shift, greeting each other, calling each other by name. Not perfect, but in the right direction. The last line of the night, not coming from a mic, it coming from the way those people looked back at those they had once made unseen. Clearer, closer dignity has no uniform. It has courage, and a promise is only worth as much as the actions that uphold it. Have you ever been made to feel unseen or seen someone else treated that way? What would you do to taps Egyptian someone else? Speak up next time. If this story resonates with you, please like, share it with friends, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.